and welcome to Midday Prime. At the Voice of Global South Summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi gives the mantra of respond, recognize, respect, reform. Prime Minister Modi said that the countries need to respond to the priorities of the Global South, recognize the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, respect international law and territorial sovereignty, and reform international institutions, including the United Nations. So in the next 1 hour, we will focus on the Voice of the Global South Summit, plus all the stories and updates coming from India and the world. WHO has reinstated the call for COVID-19 data coming from China and praised the US for its radical transparency on the Omicron outbreak. I'm Tanvi Taneja. First, let's get started with the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addresses the inaugural session of the two-day-long Voice of Global South Summit, says the Voice of Global South needs to set its own agenda, remains optimistic that despite the challenges the developing world faces, its time will come. Prime Minister further says that in 21st century, global growth will come from countries of the South, says if all work together, they can set the global agenda, adds that the Voice of the Global South needs to set its own tone. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to inaugurate the National Youth Festival at Hubballi in Karnataka today. Over 7,500 youth delegates from 28 states and 8 union territories to participate in the 7-day event. The theme of the festival is Viksit Yuva Viksit Bharat. Union Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal says India and the United States are looking to carve out bilateral solutions for outstanding WTO disputes between the two countries after emerging from 13th India-US Trade Policy Forum. Union Minister meets his US counterpart in Washington, D.C. They exchange views on further strengthening India-US commercial partnership. World Health Organization says the organization's data on the number of deaths from COVID-19 worldwide is lowered due to the underreporting of cases by China. Urges all countries to share true statistics to contribute to a more effective fight against the spread of the disease. U.S. and Japan agree to expand security alliance into space. Both countries announced a series of initiatives that will strengthen the alliance between the two nations and help guarantee a free and open Indo-Pacific. So those were the headlines we were tracking in Midday Prime today. Let's begin the bulletin with the big news. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that people of Global South should no longer be excluded from the fruits of development. Addressing the inaugural session of the Voice of Global South Summit, Prime Minister Modi said that the people of Global South have larger stakes in the future. He said 3/4 of humanity lives in these countries and they should also have an equivalent voice. Prime Minister said most of the global challenges have not been created by the Global South, but they affect them more.
We, the Global South, have the largest stakes in the future. 3/4 of humanity lives in our countries. We should also have equivalent voice. Hence, at the 8-decade-old model of global governance slowly changes. We should try to shape the emerging order. Excellencies, most of the global challenges have not been created by the Global South, but they affect us more. We have seen this in the impact of COVID pandemic, climate change, terrorism, and even the Ukraine conflict. The search for solutions also does not factor in our role of or our voice.
Prime Minister Modi added that to re-energize the world, we should together call for a global agenda of respond, recognize, respect and reform. He also said that India has always stood for the greater role of developing countries in determining a common future. He said India has chosen the theme of One Earth, One Family, One Future for its G20 presidency, which is in line with our civilizational ethos. As India begins its G20 presidency this year, Prime Minister Modi said that it is natural that our aim is to amplify the voice of the Global South.
India has always stood for a greater role for developing countries in determining our common future. Excellencies, as India begins its G20 presidency this year, it is natural that our aim is to amplify the voice of the Global South. For our G20 presidency, we have picked the theme of One Earth, One Family, One Future. This is in line with our civilizational ethos. We believe the path to realize oneness is through human-centric development. People of Global South should no longer be excluded from the fruits of development. Together, we must attempt to redesign global political and financial governance.
The Prime Minister also spoke about creating a new world order to ensure the welfare of people living in countries comprising the Global South.
We should together call for a global agenda of respond, recognize, respect and reform. Respond to the priorities of the Global South by framing an inclusive and balanced international agenda. Recognize that the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities applies to all global challenges. Respect sovereignty of all nations, rule of law and peaceful resolution of differences and disputes. And reform international institutions, including the United Nations, to make them more relevant.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi expressed confidence that in the 21st century, global growth will come from the countries of the South. Sharing his closing remarks at the Voice of the Global South Summit, Prime Minister Modi said that the developing countries in the Global South region are full of positive energy and confidence. The Prime Minister added that the Voice of the Global South needs to set its own agenda.
In the 20th century, the developed countries were the drivers of the global economy. Today, most of these advanced economies are slowing down. Clearly, in the 21st century, global growth will come from countries of the South. I think that if we work together, we can set the global agenda. The voice of the Global South needs to set its own tone. Together, we need to escape the cycle of dependency on systems and circumstances which are not of our making.
So unity of voice, unity of purpose, that's the theme of this Voice of the Global South Summit being held virtually. And let's now discuss through our video wall the challenges faced by the Global South. Up first, let's tell you what is Global South. Global South is made up of developing countries or less developed countries, not necessarily only in the region of Latin America or Africa. So there are great commonalities in the Global South countries. What are they? Most of the Global South countries share a history of colonization. The region has mostly remained underrepresented in international forums, and most prominent being the exclusion from the permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council. So this exclusion contributes towards the slower growth of the Global South because their needs are often ignored and not represented properly. But India has strongly articulated concerns of its partners on Global South in all international fora, including that of the UN. Now let's talk about what are the roadblocks and challenges to the Global South countries. Now, there are major gaps in the access to resources required for crucial developmental outcomes. Now, despite Global North countries' higher contribution towards global emissions, they often neglect to fund green energy enough. That's one of the challenge. And of course, COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated the already existing divides between the Global North and the Global South. Now, this was exposed when domestic economies like Sri Lanka, Pakistan were exposed to their economic crisis. So this vulnerability of domestic economies is far more apparent in countries ranging from Argentina. Now, Latin America is also in focus because lots of countries there are also facing economic woes. Next slide. China is increasingly making inroads in the Global South now through Belt and Road Initiative for developing infrastructure, because it's the second largest economy. It's making inroads into the Global South countries, but it is questionable whether the Belt and Road Initiative of China will be a win-win situation for both parties, or will it only focus on China's profit. Now, gender differences have been worse in the South than they have been in the North, and there is an uneven adoption of technology which has led to some countries of the Global South being unable to ensure quality education for all. Next in our video wall, let's understand how India is leading the way. India has made a strong pitch for protecting the interests of developing and underdeveloped countries. Now, through its Vaccine Maitri program, India began its historic campaign of distributing vaccines in the year 2021 to countries in need. India sent vaccines to more than 95 countries. So that included Commercial Plus grant. The list of recipients carries the names of 8 of the G20 nations as well. India also provided food aid in the form of wheat, rice, pulses and lentils to several countries. Then the proposal on TRIPS waiver, that is trade related aspects of international property rights, was also first proposed by India and South Africa in 2020. It would involve a temporary global easing of intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines and treatment. Now, India's role in action to control climate change. India will get its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatt by 2030. India will meet 50% of its energy requirement by renewable energy from 2030. By 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by less than 45%, and India will achieve the target of net zero by 2070. So these are goals that India wants to achieve to be able to give an example to the world of being serious about climate change. Next, we talk about India's participation in the UN peacekeeping missions. So since 1948, India has participated in 51 of the 71 UN peacekeeping missions. India has contributed over 2,64,000 personnel and is one of the largest contributors of peacekeepers in the world to the United Nations. So India is widely recognized as a champion of gender mainstreaming in the UN peacekeeping missions. India was the first country to deploy an all-women police unit in the UN peacekeeping history to Liberia. That was in 2007 to 2016. And in January this year, India recently deployed a women-only platoon of peacekeepers to the UN mission in Abyei on the border of Sudan and South Sudan. So India is leading the way to champion the cause of the Global South and give it greater representation. Now, to discuss all this, we are joined in Midday Prime now by Dr. Charan Singh. He is an eminent economist and CEO, Agro Foundation. Very welcome, sir, to Midday Prime. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, while virtually addressing the Voice of the Global South Summit, has said that the Global South should no longer be excluded from the fruits of development and that it must attempt to redesign global and political financial governance as well. Now, can you unravel what this very significant statement shows about the current global power structure, including global forums like the UNSC?
Absolutely. I think today's Prime Minister's speech was absolutely brilliant and on the mark. I think he is representing the Global South in a very effective way. The very fact that about 120 countries were invited, and in his opening statement, the Prime Minister said, look, we are holding the presidency of G20, but it belongs to all of you. We represent your voice. We want your representation. We want your ideas. I think the way he mentioned it, and he quoted, he said that I would like noble thoughts to come from everywhere. We welcome them. That is our prayer. And we want them from all over the universe. I think that is the attitude which the Prime Minister is showing. A great leader, as your slides showed, that India is playing a very prominent role in establishing the leadership, and the Prime Minister's speech was exactly on that. The Prime Minister also mentioned, I must say this very clearly, and as an economist I have been saying it now for nearly a year, but as a leader of our country, he mentioning it is so important that most of the challenges that the world is facing have not been created by the Global South, but the Global South is bearing the difficulties and the challenges of things that have been done by the advanced countries. And he recounted those, and I was very impressed when he spoke about terrorism, COVID, climate change, and said surprisingly the solutions are not being sought from us. And surprisingly, in the solutions, the South is not being represented. I think he is very clear in his mind, and the very fact that he said we believe in one earth, one family, one future, that means everybody should get representation. And the idea that we should get ideas and ideas can come from anywhere, I think is very welcome. So the Prime Minister's mantra that he gave today, which I would call it the respond, recognize, respect and reforms, the 4 R's that he mentioned, and he detailed them and what he means by each one of them, I thought was very clear. In the respect, he did speak about the sovereignty, and in reforms, when he mentioned about the United Nations, I worked at the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. I can tell you that these institutions, United Nations itself, but economic institutions like IMF, the World Bank, they also need reforms. And the Prime Minister has opened a new box for economists to think about it. The reforms that are needed, first, of course, as you mentioned in your slides, representation at the United Nations, but I would also say the multinational institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, how are the loans given, what type of insurance do they provide. Therefore, the whole international financial architecture needs to be looked at. That's a subset of what the Prime Minister is talking about, the United Nations Security Council. So, in a way, the Prime Minister has opened up a very new agenda for G20 to bring on the table. Please remember, G20 accounts for 80% of world GDP and about 75 to 80% of international trade. So in G20, when the Prime Minister, who's now leading the presidency, is talking about these issues and bringing the voice of South together, that's historic. And that gives lots of energy to the voice of the unrepresented South. As you mentioned, in the Global South, we have countries from Asia, Africa, Latin America. Huge countries, huge number of countries, and they're not represented at all.
So, could you highlight, Dr. Charan, some of the prominent challenges that come in the way of giving the Global South an effective voice in global matters?
Right. You look at one thing which is very important, even if we in our country face it, even the international financial architecture faces it. The countries which are poor, which really do not have universal health care, where human capacity is lacking, these are the countries which do not really get represented. and these are the countries which suffer the most. And when it comes to aid, when it comes to trade, when it comes to assistance, these are the countries which have nobody to handhold them. So that is why when the Prime Minister is saying that we have to look forward and we have to look ahead and see what best we can provide to these unrepresented countries. He mentioned about the COVID, and look, when he mentioned in COVID, he said where was the healthcare? And that's why India had to provide healthcare vaccines to 100 countries. When he speaks about climate change, again, you know, the climate change finance, because of COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war, that is taking a hit. The Prime Minister has promised about net zero, but as far as other emerging countries and other less developed countries are concerned, they are also being affected by the climate change. Then comes terrorism. Now, terrorism is starting from different agendas across the world, the geopolitical reasons, but then these are the countries which suffer the most. And take the latest case of Russia-Ukraine war and its economic implications. Just imagine, because the prices of oil, fertilizers, some agriculture products, wheat has gone up, therefore the inflation has gone up, and therefore the advanced countries which have the wherewithal have been raising the interest rates. Least worried, least concerned, what will be the spillover effects on employment and growth, and sometimes on poverty and healthcare on those countries which have not been playing any role in these. So when the interest rates rise, unemployment comes, exports suffer, markets suffer. Now when the Prime Minister talks about it, I must take you back about 10 to 15 years when the 2008 global financial crisis happened. Even at that time, there was total unresponsible behavior from the advanced countries in the subprime and the derivatives, and after the Lehman Brothers in the policy initiatives that were taken there. The current inflation round that you see of oil and food prices is partly to be blamed because it has its roots there. So the point is, in global policy making, and the Prime Minister uses this word, that's why it's a very important speech. He says one future. If decisions are taken at the multinational institutions like the United Nations, IMF, World Bank, without concerning the implications for the South or the least developed countries, then some countries are taking care of their interest and their local population, but what implications it has for the rest of the world, nobody is bothered. So those are the type of economic implications, political implications, social and climate implications of the South, which are totally neglected by the advanced countries. And the Prime Minister is bringing it onto the table and saying that in its G20 presidency, it would like to sensitize the advanced world that your initiatives, your actions can have such detrimental impact on those countries which do not have a voice. I like the word he said, the voice of the South.
Yes.
Because that is an unheard voice.
Yes, so even G20's troika comprises right now of countries of the global south. In your view, how far and in what ways can India's leadership of the global south help in correcting the current global power imbalance to give the global south their due place in the global power structures?
You know, this is a very good question. And I must tell you, we are very lucky in that sense, in the time that the presidency has come to India. It has come from Indonesia, another emerging country, India, and then it goes to Brazil, it goes to South Africa. For 3 years, it's going to be with us. But why I say we are very lucky at the time that it has come to India, I must mention this. And please remember, please underline this, what I'm sharing with you. In COVID, the strategies, the policies, the global responsibility with which initiatives were brought in by India are exemplary. These need to be celebrated and these need to be shared with the rest of the world. When the rest of the world was doing knee-jerk reactions, ridiculing sometimes India, saying that your support systems are very inadequate, you have seen the repercussions of that and the amplification in terms of 5 times more their average of inflation, and that is why they have to aggressively go for a strict monetary policy. In contrast, what India did, it did its fiscal policy in a very deliberate, measured way, laser beam, reaching the people. Free food was provided. There was poverty support provided in sense of free food. Free medicines were given. Free vaccination was given. Advanced countries were not doing this. They were just pouring money, and that showed implications in the liquidity and the high inflation that happened. When it comes to monetary policy, similarly, in a balanced way, things were done for the banking system. No banks have collapsed. Banks have survived. Their NPAs are rather in control. Their credit to the banking system is good. Health, labor, employment, mudra loans, and even exports, and the PLI scheme for promotion of production was all there. What happened? It sustained the economy, it ensured social cohesion, no social disturbance, it sustained the economy, and the result is that today we are the fastest growing economy in the world and we have the lowest inflation. Our exchange rate has been implicated the minimum. This is what we need to showcase to the world, that public policy has to be done in a measured tone, laser beam to the segment where it is required, rather than do an overall pouring of money and expecting that things will go good on its own. Not only now, if India has to tell the world how we guarded against the derivative products of the subprime market in America, when India was constantly being ridiculed, why we did not introduce sophisticated derivatives, India held on its position and said no, our country cannot handle it. The third case is the capital account convertibility. Immense pressure on India after we did our reforms in 91 and even lately to go in for capital account convertibility. India said no, we have to take care of our population, our local industry and our local trade and commerce. And you see, the world came around and said India was right. So the point I'm trying to make is, the presidency has come to India when India has established a checkered track record of extremely good public policy, be it fiscal policy, be it monetary policy, be it labor, be it agriculture, be it trade. Those things have to be shared with the rest of the world. The last example I'd like to give you, you may be running out of time.
No, please go ahead.
So the last example which I want to give you is something on the import reserves. For a long time in 1991, we suffered the biggest crisis because we did not have foreign exchange reserves to meet our imports. India came out in 93 with the import reserve ratio of reserves being adequate for at least 1 year. Much later, after the Asian crisis and trouble and Argentinian crisis, the world came out 10 years later with the import covered solution, which was exactly what India had done in 93. Had that been told to the world, Asian crisis would not have happened. Argentinian situations would not have happened. But we did. I think this is the time God sent to us. We have to showcase to the world how our policies are far more responsible.
Yes.
And why do we do that? Because the Prime Minister's mantra, one earth,
one family, one
that's
future,
what we believe in.
It puts greater emphasis on human development. So while the world is looking at perilously close to being recession, we are being touted as the bright spot. We leave the discussion here. Thank you very much, Dr. Charan Singh, for joining us in Midday Prime and sharing your valuable insights on the changing global structure. And moving on now to our National Prime segment. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate the National Youth Festival at Hubballi in Karnataka today. This is the 26th National Youth Festival, which is organized every year to mark youth icon Swami Vivekananda's Jayanti. The festival is organized by the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports. Over 7,500 youth delegates from 28 states and 8 union territories will participate in the 7-day event. The theme of the festival is Viksit Yuva, Viksit Bharat. More in our next report.
Hubballi is Karnataka's economic capital and was once known as Chota Bombay, as it reflected the economic hustle and bustle of Mumbai city. The city is all set to welcome Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Thursday. The delegates from across the country have reached Dharwad, where Janotsav events will be held till the 16th of January. Hubli-Dharwad as a twin city is also known for educational institutions. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will address the youth at the National Youth Festival in Hubli. This edition of the Youth Festival gains significance as it is being held after the pandemic and the earlier editions were virtual. There is visible enthusiasm among the delegates and they look forward to connecting with PM Modi. The festival's theme, Viksit Yuva, Viksit Bharat, also represents the youth of India as the fountainhead of India's power and underlines the nation's presidency of G20 as well.
As you are aware, it is a very prestigious national level event which is celebrated on the birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda and Honorable Prime Minister himself coming and attending the opening ceremony. He sends a big message about Hubli-Dharwad being an important place in Karnataka and also at the national level now because of the festival also. So it is going to give us a good opportunity to showcase ourselves, to project our art, literature, culture, history, and also our contemporary brand value of the city will also be magnified because of this visit. And we are also trying from district administration to show our participants and also to all other people through media what our city is about and what our place is about. And
Prime Minister in his earlier address had inspired the youth and entrusted them with the responsibility of building a new India with their innovative thinking and creative approach.
मोदी जी की जो शैली, वक्तृत्व शैली और सभी उन्हीं से हम प्रेरित होते हैं और उनका हमारे अलग ही प्रकार का प्रभाव पड़ता है।
थैंक यू हमें मौका देने के लिए, हमें नेशनल्स के लिए सिलेक्ट करने के लिए, और प्राइम मिनिस्टर को भी थैंक यू कि उन्होंने इतना बड़ा हमारे लिए स्टेज सजाया, हमें इतना बड़ा मौका दिया यहाँ आने के लिए, अपने आप को, अपने प्रोग्राम्स को यहाँ पे दिखाने के लिए।
Vast arrangements regarding food and shelter for the visiting young artists and delegates have been planned. This youth festival will also be a platform to promote millets, as year 2023 is also declared as Year of Millets.
The aim of the National Youth Festival is not just to promote national integration or cultural exchange of ideas between the participants, but it also aims to promote young leadership among the youth of India. And this youth festival being held at a very crucial period when India is holding the G20 presidency, this will set another milestone and inspire the youngsters in the country to take up global leadership and put India on the map of developed nations. With cameraman Apaji Rao, Asha Khanam, DD India, Dharwad.
Union Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal has said that India and the US are looking to carve out bilateral solutions to the several long-standing World Trade Organization WTO disputes between the two countries. Piyush Goyal made these comments after the conclusion of the 13th India-US Trade Policy Forum TPF with his US counterpart, United States Trade Representative Ambassador Catherine Tai in Washington.
There was a very robust discussion amongst the officials and then today at the ministerial level at finding solutions to the several WTO disputes that have been going on for several years between the US and India. These outstanding disputes are areas where both countries have had some wins, some losses, and we have directed our officials to engage very aggressively and over the next 2 or 3 months to see if we can find bilateral settlement of some of these WTO disputes, demonstrating the trust and friendship between the two countries. And we hope that some satisfactory outcomes will come in the next few months.
Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal further said that an official level discussion on Indo-Pacific economic framework will be held in India next month. He said India and the US have also finalized dates for the next commercial dialogue and the CEO forum meeting to be held in India in March this year. He also laid emphasis on greater market access, ease of doing business and a larger footprint for trade and investment between the two countries.
New Trade Policy Forum Working Group on Resilient Trade will enable both sides to deepen our dialogue on a range of issues which can help us enhance our resilient supply chains, and also help us create sustainable trade relationships between businesses in the US and in India to meet the challenges of tomorrow. We want to be future ready to meet emerging issues that come up in the years ahead. This resilient trade working group will come up with responses to some pressing problems which we have articulated.
Commerce and Industry Minister also met the U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo in Washington. Both leaders exchanged views on further strengthening India-US commercial partnership. Both sides covered several aspects such as India's efforts to become more self-sufficient in areas such as semiconductors and defense production. The leaders also discussed the upcoming commercial dialogue, CEO forum and continuing work under the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Later, talking to media, Piyush Goyal informed about the upcoming India visit of US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo in March. And moving on, in National Prime, Chief of Army Staff General Manoj Pandey held a press conference today. He said that situation is stable and unpredictable on northern borders, and the army has been able to resolve 5 of the 7 issues that were put on the table.
If I were to summarize the situation along our borders, and I shall take the northern borders first, I would say the situation is stable and under control, yet unpredictable. You are aware of the ongoing talks, wherein we have been able to resolve 5 out of the 7 issues that were on the table, and we are continuing to talk both at the diplomatic as well as the military level. In terms of our preparedness levels, they remain of a very high standard. We have adequate forces, we have adequate reserves in each of our sectors to be able to effectively deal with any situation or contingency.
Chief of Army Staff General Manoj Pandey also said that as far as the situation in Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, the ceasefire understanding which came about in February 2021 is holding well. But he added that cross-border support to terrorism and terror infrastructure, however, remains.
As far as the situation in the Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, I think the ceasefire understanding which came about in February of 2021, that is holding well. The cross-border support to terrorism and the terrorist infrastructure, however, remains. In the hinterland itself, we have seen some of the proxy tanzeems which have been indulging in activities or acts purely with a view to gain visibility and remain in the news.
And in Midday Prime, it's now time for news and updates from the world of business. In Business Prime today, first we talk about global energy market. Russian President Vladimir Putin, during a televised meeting with senior officials, said a price cap on Russian oil exports agreed by Western countries would not create problems for the country's budget. Putin was responding to comments by Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak, who mentioned that Russian oil and gas companies say that they were not experiencing problems with export contracts. Novak said that they have been in constant touch with the companies, and on the whole, the companies are not saying that they have problems as of today. Putin last month signed a decree that banned the supply of crude oil and oil products from February 1st for 5 months to nations that abide by the cap. Novak said that the main problem for Russian oil was a high discount to international benchmarks as well as rising freight costs. Russian oil traditionally sells at a discount to international benchmarks such as Brent.
We should look at that discount so that it doesn't create any budget problems. We can state with assurance that the financial and banking system of the country, the economy, is stable and is actively developing. We have every reason to believe we will maintain these tempos in 2023.
In comments about possible losses from such measures, Kremlin also said that it had not yet seen any cases of price caps on Russian oil imposed by the West last month. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said no one has especially seen the caps yet as far as the losses are concerned. Peskov also said Russia would do everything to protect itself from the plans of the G7 leading economies to impose 2 sets of price caps on Russian oil products. The price cap allows non-EU countries to continue importing seaborne Russian crude oil but prohibits shipping, insurance and reassurance companies from handling cargoes of Russian crude around the world unless it is sold for less than $60 a barrel. Some analysts have previously said that the caps will have little immediate impact on the oil revenues that Moscow is currently earning. And overnight on Wall Street, U.S. stocks ended with strong gains on Wednesday, led by a jump in the Nasdaq, as investors were optimistic ahead of an inflation report that could give the U.S. Federal Reserve room to dial back on its aggressive interest rate hikes. The much anticipated report due on Thursday is projected by economists to show U.S. consumer prices likely grew 6.5% year-on-year in December, moderating from a 7.1% rise in November. Among sectors, real estate and consumer discretionary were the day's strongest performers. So the S&P 500 gained 1.3%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index gained 1.8%.
Well, there is an interesting dichotomy over the last 12 months or so where the equal weighted S&P index has significantly outperformed the market cap weighted index. And that tells you that average companies across these industries throughout America are starting to regain their footing. They are seeing the end of the bear market to some degree. That index has been up significantly from its lows back in October, whereas the market cap weighted ones are loaded up with a lot of tech stocks, and those are still seeing valuation compression. So the message there is that there's opportunity in the average stock.
Now, updates from back home. India is set to gain a huge boost in inland water transportation by launching the world's longest river cruise, that is MV Ganga Vilas. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will flag off this extraordinary river trail on Friday. More inputs from our correspondent Tapas Bhattacharya.
Varanasi or Banaras is one of the oldest living cities in the world. The city is a center of learning and civilization for over 3,000 years. And now it will write a new chapter in its fabled history. The world's longest river cruise, the Ganga Vilas, is all set to be flagged off by Prime Minister Narendra Modi on 13th of January. The cruise will set off from Uttar Pradesh, Varanasi, and will conclude in Dibrugarh in Assam. It will set sail from the sacred Varanasi to Dibrugarh via Bangladesh, covering 3,200 kilometers on the two of the greatest rivers of India, the Ganga and Brahmaputra. The journey will pass through 27 river systems in India and Bangladesh. The cruise will cover over 50 important places, including World Heritage Sites. During its journey, the cruise will also pass through national parks and sanctuaries, including Sundarban Delta and the Kaziranga National Park. The itinerary of the cruise has been curated to showcase the rich heritage of India. From the famous Ganga Aarti in Varanasi, it will stop at Sarnath, a place of great reverence for Buddhism. The traveller will also visit Bihar School of Yoga and Vikramasila University, allowing them to soak in the rich Indian heritage in spirituality and knowledge. The cruise will also traverse through the biodiversity-rich World Heritage Sites of Sundarbans in Bay of Bengal Delta, famous for its Royal Bengal tiger, as well as the Kaziranga National Park, famous for its one-horned rhino. The cruise will stay on Bangladesh rivers for a fortnight and thereafter will return to India via Guwahati and will reach Dibrugarh. The journey from Varanasi to Dibrugarh will take almost 51 days. The luxury cruise has a capacity of 80 passengers and it features 18 suites and all the other amenities. The maiden voyage of MV Ganga Vilas will witness 32 tourists from Switzerland relishing the Varanasi to Dibrugarh journey. The elegantly decorated suites on the ship are constructed with a distinctive style and a futuristic outlook. With camera person Sandeep, this is Taposh Bhattacharya from the Varanasi Ghats for DD India.
And next in Midday Prime, more international news in our segment World Prime. First news from Peru. Recent outbreak of violence has left a total of 40 people killed, including one police officer. But the real agony is of the families carrying their coffins through the streets on Wednesday. In the southern region of Puno, Peruvians paid their respects to the deceased by carrying coffins before their burial, along with photos of the faces of the victims, flowers, Peruvian flags and banners, blaming the new government that the restrictions were necessary to prepare the country for the effects of climate change. Meanwhile, farmers and regional politicians say it will affect many livelihoods as the water transfer from the Tagus irrigates 70% of the fruit and vegetables exported by Spain, and 25,000 jobs could be lost if the water transfer is cut off. Thousands of current and retired public employees, including health workers, teachers and pensioners, marched on the street of Venezuela on Wednesday to demand better wages. Waving Venezuelan flags and banners with out-of-circulation Bolivar banknotes, hundreds of protesters marched through the streets of downtown Caracas to the headquarters of the Ombudsman office. High inflation and Venezuela's gradual shift to the dollar are widening the wage gap between public and private sector workers. Members of the pro-government National Assembly said that the government lacks sufficient resources to meet its labor commitments because of US sanctions. Annual inflation in October last year hit 155% and more than half of Venezuelans live in poverty. World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has said that the organization's data on the number of deaths from COVID-19 worldwide is lowered due to the underreporting by cases from China. During a media briefing in Geneva, WHO chief urged all countries to share true statistics so as to contribute to a more effective fight against the spread of the disease. The WHO said a lack of data was making it challenging to help China manage the risks of a COVID-19 surge over the Lunar New Year holiday as the world's second largest economy reopens after 3 years of isolation. The holiday, known before the pandemic as the world's largest annual migration of people, comes amid an escalating diplomatic spat over COVID-19 curbs that saw Beijing introduce transit curbs for South Korean and Japanese nationals on Wednesday. The virus is spreading unchecked in China after Beijing abruptly began dismantling its previously tight curbs in early December following historic protests seen in a decade there. The WHO further said it still does not have enough information from China to make a full assessment of the dangers of the surge. Meanwhile, Japan and South Korea defended public health restrictions on travelers from China on Wednesday, a day after China stopped issuing new visas in both countries in an apparent retaliation. South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin on Wednesday said he finds it significantly regrettable that China stopped issuing short-term visas to South Koreans and called for China to align its pandemic steps with scientific and objective facts. According to South Korea's Disease Control and Prevention Agency, about 17% of the 2,550 short-term travelers from China from January 2nd to 10th have tested positive. South Korea has stopped issuing most short-term visas at its consulates in China through the end of January, while also requiring all passengers from China, Hong Kong and Macau to submit proofs of negative tests taken within 48 hours of their arrival, in addition to COVID-19 tests at the airport. Now, the U.S. Health Department on Wednesday extended the COVID-19 pandemic status as a public health emergency, allowing millions of Americans to continue receiving free tests, vaccines and treatment. The emergency was first declared in January 2020 when the coronavirus pandemic began and has been renewed each quarter since then. It was due to end this week. Biden administration officials had said in November that the possibility of a winter surge in COVID-19 cases and the need for more time to transition to a private market for the sale of tests, vaccines and treatments were the two factors that contributed to the decision not to end the emergency status in January. U.S. and Japanese security officials have announced a series of initiatives that will strengthen the alliance between the two nations and help guarantee a free and open Indo-Pacific. The initiatives have been announced after the 2+2 talks held in Washington, D.C. The two nations announced a significant strengthening of their military relationship and upgrade of the U.S. military's force posture in the country on Wednesday, including the stationing of a newly redesignated Marine unit with advanced intelligence, surveillance capabilities and the ability to fire anti-ship missiles. The U.S. will also sign a new agreement with Japan later this week on cooperation in space. The officials met on Wednesday as part of the annual U.S. Japan Security Consultative Committee meeting, days before President Joe Biden plans to meet with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the White House.
The U.S. Japan alliance remains the cornerstone of our Indo-Pacific strategy, and it's critical to upholding a free and open regional order. Our alliance is stronger than ever, building on a foundation of teamwork, trust, and shared values that has underpinned our relationship for decades.
Japan's pledge to double defense spending by 2027. Japan's strategies align closely with our own national security strategy, both in the key challenges that we identify, as well as in how to effectively address them. We're committed to upholding shared values of democracy and human rights, defending the international rule of law, continuing to lead the world in tackling global challenges that no one country can solve alone, like the climate crisis and deadly viruses. Later this week, Foreign Minister and I will sign a new agreement on U.S. Japan cooperation in space. This agreement has been a decade in the making. It covers everything from joint research to working together to land the first woman and person of color on the moon.
And time now for all the action from the world of sports. First news from the world of cricket. Sri Lanka has won the toss and chose to bat in the second ODI against India at the Eden Gardens in Kolkata. Captain Dasun Shanaka made two changes in the side, while Rohit Sharma has brought Kuldeep Yadav in place of Chahal, who is injured. Till the last reports came in, Sri Lanka were at 99 for the loss of 1 wicket. In football, champions Manchester City crashed out of the League Cup after suffering a shock 2-0 defeat at the struggling hands of Southampton in the quarter-finals. Southampton, bottom of the Premier League table, scored twice in the first half through Sekau Mara and Mausa Nenepo, and City never seriously threatened to get back into the match. Mara scored his first goal for Southampton in the 23rd minute as he connected well with a whipped cross by Lanko, and the hosts doubled the lead 5 minutes later when Nenepo spotted City goalkeeper Stefan Ortega off his line and curled a stunning effort into the top corner. City failed to register a shot on target as the second half introduction of substitutes Kevin De Bruyne and Erling Haaland failed to spark a revival for Pep Guardiola's side. So that's it in Midday Prime today. Hope you enjoyed watching our show as much as we liked it, presenting it for you. News and updates continue on our channel where we cut the noise. Thank you for being with us. Namaskar.